April 12, 1944. 30,000 feet above Magdeburg, Germany, the air was so cold it burned. Oberleutnant Erich Voss scanned the horizon through the crystal-clear canopy of his Focke-Wulf 198, his breath forming clouds despite the oxygen mask clamped to his face. Below him, the gray industrial landscape of central Germany stretched endlessly, punctuated by the dark smudges of flak bursts where American bombers were catching hell. Then he saw them, silver dots climbing from the west, their contrails painting white lines across the cobalt sky. They moved with a strange grace, wings long and sleek, fuselages slender compared to the barrel-chested thunderbolts that had been plaguing the Luftwaffe for months. Voss pressed his throat mic. Achtung, neue Amerikaner, he transmitted to his staffel. Another batch of flying toys coming our way. His wingman, Feldwebel Hans Kruger, laughed over the radio. Too pretty for war, Herr Oberleutnant. Should we teach them some manners? Voss smiled beneath his mask. In the past year, he'd shot down 17 Allied aircraft, Spitfires, Thunderbolts, even a Mosquito. These new American fighters looked fast, he'd give them that. But fast wasn't enough. The Luftwaffe had been fighting since 1939. These boys were probably farm kids from Iowa who'd never seen combat. HAL 10C formation, Voss ordered. We hit them from above. Standard bounce. What Voss didn't know, what none of the German pilots circling like predators could have imagined, was that those flying toys were about to rewrite the rules of aerial warfare over Europe. They were North American P-51 Mustangs, and they had come to stay. The P-51's journey to the skies over Germany had been anything but straightforward. When the British Purchasing Commission approached North American aviation in 1940, desperate for fighters to replace losses in the Battle of Britain, they asked for the company to build Curtiss P-40 Warhawks under license. James Dutch Kindleberger, North American's president, made an audacious counteroffer. Give us 120 days, and we'll design you something better. The British, skeptical but desperate, agreed. What emerged from North American's Inglewood, California factory was revolutionary. The NA-73X prototype, which first flew on October 26, 1940, featured a laminar flow wing design that reduced drag dramatically. Its sleek fuselage, designed around the cooling system for the Allison V1710 engine, looked more like a racing plane than a fighter. The British christened it Mustang, and initial reports were promising. It was fast, faster than anything the RAF had at low altitude. It handled beautifully, but there was a critical problem. The Allison engine's performance fell off dramatically above 15,000 feet. In the high-altitude war over Europe, this was a fatal flaw. The Mustang seemed destined to be another promising design that never quite delivered, until someone had a brilliant idea. In April 1942, Ronald Harker, a test pilot for Rolls-Royce, flew a Mustang and immediately recognized its potential. Marry this airframe to a Merlin engine, he told anyone who would listen, and you'll have the best fighter in the world. The Packard-built Merlin V1650, the same engine powering Spitfires and Lancasters, transformed the Mustang from a low-altitude reconnaissance fighter into a high-altitude predator. The P-51B, powered by the 1,450 horsepower Merlin, could reach 440 miles per hour at 30,000 feet and climb to altitude faster than any German fighter. But speed and altitude performance were only part of the equation. What made the Mustang truly revolutionary was its range. With internal fuel tanks holding 184 gallons and two 108-gallon drop tanks under the wings, a P-51 could fly over 1,800 miles, more than enough to escort bombers to Berlin and back. For the first time, American heavy bombers would have fighter protection deep into the Reich. The Luftwaffe was about to discover that the days of unopposed attacks on bomber formations were over. Major James Howard of the 354th Fighter Group was among the first American pilots to take the Mustang into combat over Germany. A former Flying Tiger who'd fought in China, Howard understood what made a fighter deadly. Not just performance, but the ability to press an advantage. On January 11, 1944, Howard led his squadron escorting B-17s to Ostersleben. when a massive formation of Luftwaffe fighters, over 30 Bf 109s and FW 190s, dove on the bombers. Howard's squadron was outnumbered 3-1. What happened next would earn Howard the Medal of Honor and send shockwaves through the Luftwaffe. Howard's Mustang, christened Ding Hao, Chinese for very good, tore into the German formation. For over 30 minutes, he engaged enemy fighters alone, his wingmen having become separated in the initial clash. Using the Mustang's superior speed and diving ability, Howard employed brutal hit-and-run tactics. Dive, fire, climb, repeat. The 6.50 caliber Brownings in the Mustang's wings spoke with devastating authority. Each gun carried 400 rounds, 2,400 rounds total, enough for sustained combat. Unlike German fighters with limited cannon ammunition, the Mustang could fight for minutes, not seconds. Howard shot down 4 confirmed kills and damaged several others. But more importantly, his aggressive attacks disrupted the entire German formation, preventing them from concentrating on the bombers. Not a single B-17 was lost to fighters that day. When Howard landed, his Mustang had 3 bullet holes and was nearly out of ammunition. His combat report was characteristically modest: engaged enemy aircraft. Results inconclusive due to combat conditions. The Luftwaffe's assessment was less modest. The intelligence report that reached Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring's desk in late January was stark. New American long-range fighter demonstrates exceptional performance at all altitudes. Pilot quality superior. Recommend immediate countermeasures. But there were no countermeasures. The P-51 was faster than the Bf-109 above 25,000 feet. It could outdive the FW-190. And unlike German fighters struggling with fuel shortages, it could fight all the way to Berlin and return home. Oberleutnant Erich Voss learned these hard truths on April 12, 1944, when his Staffel intercepted what they thought were easy prey. The formation of P-51s that Voss had spotted continued climbing, seemingly unaware of the German fighters' position above them. Voss positioned his Focke-Wulf for a classic bounce, diving from the sun with speed advantage, firing a quick burst, then extending away before the escorts could react. It was a tactic that had worked against Thunderbolts, which were too heavy to follow in a climb. These slender American fighters looked even less capable of vertical maneuvering. Angriff, Voss transmitted, rolling his FW-190 into a steep dive. 6 German fighters followed, their BMW 801 radial engines howling as they plummeted toward the American formation. Voss's gun sights settled on the trailing Mustang. A perfect shot, less than 300 meters, closing fast. His finger tightened on the trigger. But something was wrong. The American formation didn't scatter in panic. Instead, they executed a perfectly coordinated break, each aircraft rolling hard in different directions. And the trailing Mustang, the one Voss had targeted, didn't run. It turned into him. Impossible, Voss thought. Nothing could turn that hard at this speed and altitude. But the Mustang was doing exactly that, its wings biting into the thin air with authority no German fighter could match at 30,000 feet. Voss's speed carried him past the American, but before he could extend and climb, he heard a sound that would haunt German pilots for the rest of the war. A deep, throaty roar, like rolling thunder, followed by the staccato hammering of multiple machine guns firing in perfect synchronization. Tracer rounds, bright even in daylight, flashed past his canopy. Voss yanked his stick-hard left, but the Mustang pilot had anticipated the move. More tracers, closer this time. Then the hits came. Not the sharp crack of cannon shells, but a continuous drumming, like hail on a tin roof. 50 caliber rounds, each weighing nearly 2 ounces, punched through the FW-190's rear fuselage. The armor plate behind Voss's seat absorbed several hits, but others tore through hydraulic lines and control cables. His aircraft shuddered violently. The control stick went mushy. Smoke began pouring from beneath the cowling. Ich bin getroffen. Voss transmitted. I'm hit. He looked back and saw the Mustang following him, not firing now, but staying close, like a shark circling wounded prey. The American pilot knew the Focke-Wulf was finished. Voss's engine seized with a violent bang. Oil sprayed across his windscreen, turning the world into a brown smear. He had maybe 30 seconds before the engine caught fire. He reached for the canopy release, his mind already running through bailout procedures. But even in that moment of mortal danger, part of him was analyzing what had just happened. The American hadn't gotten lucky. This wasn't a spray-and-pray kill. The pilot had predicted Voss's evasion, positioned perfectly, and fired with surgical precision. The gun platform had been rock-steady despite violent maneuvering. And those machine guns, Jesus, those guns had spoken with a concentrated fury that shredded his aircraft in seconds. As Voss pulled the canopy release and felt the slipstream tear at his flight suit, he glimpsed the Mustang one last time. It was already climbing, returning to the bomber stream, its job done. Beautiful aircraft, Voss thought, even as his parachute deployed with a bone-jarring snap. Absolutely beautiful, and absolutely deadly. The transformation of American fighter tactics in early 1944 was as important as the aircraft themselves. When the first P-51B groups arrived in Europe in late 1943, they brought not just new machines but new doctrine. Colonel Donald Blakesley, commanding the 4th Fighter Group, was a hard-nosed veteran who'd flown Spitfires with the RAF before transferring to the USAF. When his group transitioned to Mustangs, he threw out the old rulebook. "Forget what you learned about escort," he told his pilots. "We're not shepherds protecting a flock. We're wolves hunting other wolves. The best way to protect bombers is to kill German fighters, all of them, wherever we find them." Blakesley developed what became known as fighter sweeps, aggressive patrols that ranged ahead of bomber formations, seeking combat rather than waiting for it. When German fighters appeared, Mustang formations would split into elements, using superior speed and altitude to dictate engagement terms. The tactics were devastatingly effective. On March 4, 1944, during the first American raid on Berlin, Blakesley's 4th Fighter Group encountered over 50 German fighters near Brandenburg. Instead of staying tight to the bombers, Blakesley led his Mustangs straight into the enemy formation. Big, beautiful doll, Blakesley's P-51 tore through a staffel of Bf-109s, his 6.50 calibers shredding one fighter before it could react. Around him, his pilots executed practice maneuvers, vertical scissors, high yo-yos, defensive splits that German pilots had never seen from American fighters. The engagement lasted 12 minutes. When it ended, 15 German fighters were destroyed for the loss of 2 Mustangs. But more importantly, the Luftwaffe's attempt to mass fighters for a coordinated attack on the bombers had been shattered. That night, Luftwaffe intelligence officers pored over combat reports from surviving pilots. The assessments were uniformly grim. "The new American fighter dominates at all altitudes," wrote Major Gunther Rahl, one of Germany's top aces. "It is faster than our fighters above 6,000 meters. It turns better at altitude. It climbs better. And the pilots are aggressive, well-trained, and confident. We are losing the qualitative edge we have maintained since 1940. Reichsmarshal Göring's response, delivered at a staff meeting on March 8th, was characteristically delusional. Impossible. German fighters are superior. These reports must be exaggerated. But the numbers didn't lie. In March 1944 alone, P-51 units claimed 367 Luftwaffe fighters destroyed for the loss of 51 Mustangs, a kill ratio of better than 7-1. And those were just air-to-air victories. On the ground, Mustangs were strafing airfields, destroying aircraft before they could even take off. The P-51D, which began reaching combat units in May 1944, represented the ultimate evolution of the Mustang design. The most visible change was the bubble canopy, replacing the earlier Razorback design and giving pilots unobstructed 360-degree visibility. But the improvements went deeper. 6.50 caliber M2 Brownings, 3 in each wing, provided devastating firepower. The ammunition capacity increased to 400 rounds per inboard gun and 270 rounds for the middle and outboard weapons, 1,880 rounds total. At the standard convergence setting of 300 yards, All 6 guns' ballistic paths intersected in a zone roughly 4 feet in diameter. Anything in that zone faced approximately 70 rounds per second, each projectile traveling at 2,900 feet per second. The math was simple and brutal. A 2-second burst put 140 half-inch bullets into a target area the size of a kitchen table. German aircraft caught in that cone of fire didn't just fall, they disintegrated. Lieutenant Colonel John D. Landers, commanding the 78 Fighter Group, described the effect in a post-mission debriefing. You don't really aim at them. You aim where they're going to be. Touch the trigger, and the guns make this sound like ripping canvas, but deeper. Mechanical. Precise. The tracers draw a line right to the target. Then there's just an explosion of pieces. Wings fold, the fuselage breaks, everything comes apart. It's over in 2-3 seconds. Clinical. That's the word. Clinical. The ammunition itself was a masterpiece of American manufacturing. Each .50 caliber cartridge, whether armor-piercing incendiary, API, armor-piercing incendiary tracer, APIT, or standard ball, was machined to tolerances of 1/1000th of an inch. The powder charges were measured to the grain. The primers were tested for reliability at temperature extremes. This precision meant the Browning M2 rarely jammed, even under the stress of high-G maneuvers. German pilots, accustomed to their MG-151/20 cannons malfunctioning after a few bursts, were stunned by American guns that fired continuously for 30 seconds without stoppage. The Mustang's cooling system, often overlooked, was equally remarkable. The ventral scoop beneath the fuselage wasn't just a radiator intake. It was a carefully designed duct that actually produced thrust through the Meredith effect. Hot air exiting the radiator was accelerated, partially offsetting the drag penalty of the cooling system. This attention to aerodynamic detail gave the P-51D a top speed of 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, making it one of the fastest piston engine fighters of the war. More importantly, it could maintain cruise speeds of 360 miles per hour at 25,000 feet while consuming only 60 gallons per hour, giving it an operational radius of over 750 miles with drop tanks. Berlin, 600 miles from bases in England, was well within range. The psychological impact of P-51s over Berlin cannot be overstated. For German civilians and military personnel alike, the appearance of American fighters over the Reich capital in March 1944 shattered the illusion of invulnerability that Göring had promised. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, inspector of fighters for the Luftwaffe, watched from the ground as silver Mustangs circled over Berlin on March 6, 1944. The sight filled him with a dread he'd never experienced in years of combat. When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, Galland later wrote in his memoirs, I knew the jig was up. Our fighters couldn't reach them at that altitude. Our flak couldn't touch them. They could go anywhere over Germany, and we couldn't stop them. The Americans could see our capital, our factories, our homes, and we were powerless. German propaganda tried to minimize the impact. Radio broadcasts claimed the American fighters were lost or fleeing from superior German interceptors. But Berliners could see the contrails with their own eyes, could hear the distant thunder of American engines, could watch as their vaunted Luftwaffe failed to drive the invaders away. For Luftwaffe pilots, the pressure became unbearable. They were ordered to stop the bombers at all costs, but that meant flying through swarms of Mustangs that seemed to be everywhere at once. Unteroffizier Werner Hohenberg, a young pilot with 2/JG3, described his first encounter with P-51s in a letter to his family, a letter that was never sent, found among his effects after he was killed in action on April 29, 1944. We took off at dawn, 20 aircraft strong. We would intercept the Americans over Kassel, they said. It would be glorious, they said. We climbed through clouds, engines straining. At 8,000 meters, we broke into sunlight, and they were waiting. Mustangs, at least 30 of them, higher than us, faster than us, between us and the bombers. Oberfeldwebel Richter led us up to engage. The Americans didn't run. They came down on us like judgment. I saw Richter's 109 explode, just gone, replaced by black smoke and tumbling pieces. I turned hard, my vision graying from the GS, but one of them followed me through the turn. The guns, mother of God, the guns. I've never heard anything like it. A deep roaring, mechanical sound like the world tearing apart. My aircraft shook. The wing crumpled. I barely got out. 11 of our 20 made it back. We didn't even reach the bombers. These aren't the Americans we were told about. Clumsy pilots in inferior machines. These are hunters, and we're the prey. The versatility of the P-51 extended beyond air superiority. While the Thunderbolt became the premier fighter bomber in the tactical role, Mustangs increasingly conducted what became known as fighter sweeps, low-level attacks on German infrastructure. On April 5, 1944, Lieutenant Urban Ben Drew of the 361st Fighter Group demonstrated the Mustang's ground attack capabilities in spectacular fashion. While escorting bombers near Berlin, Drew's elements spotted a German airfield near Parchim with dozens of aircraft dispersed around the perimeter. The temptation was too great to resist. Drew dove his Mustang from 10,000 feet, building speed to over 400 miles per hour. At treetop level, he opened fire on a line of Junkers Ju-88 bombers. The 6.50 calibers, loaded with armor-piercing incendiary ammunition, tore through the parked aircraft. Fuel tanks exploded, aluminum skin shredded. In a single pass, Drew destroyed 4 aircraft and damaged 3 others. But he wasn't done. Pulling up hard, Drew spotted a Bf-109 attempted to take off. The German pilot likely scrambled to intercept the American bombers. Never saw the Mustang diving on his 6 o'clock. Drew's gun camera captured the destruction frame by frame. The 109, just lifting off the runway, was caught in a perfect deflection shot. 50 caliber rounds walked up the fuselage from tail to cockpit. The fighter nosed over, cartwheeled across the grass, and exploded. As Drew climbed away from the airfield, 2 more Bf-109s appeared, desperately trying to gain altitude. Drew engaged both, shooting down one and damaging the other before his wingman finished it off. In less than 5 minutes, Drew had destroyed or damaged 9 German aircraft, 4 on the ground, 5 in the air. When he landed back in England, his gun camera film became required viewing for every Mustang pilot in the theater. The lesson was clear. The P-51 wasn't just an escort fighter. It was a multi-role weapon that could clear the sky of enemy fighters and then destroy them on the ground. The summer of 1944 brought new challenges for the Luftwaffe as American production reached overwhelming levels. By June, over 1,000 P-51s were operational in the European theater. They flew multiple missions daily, maintaining constant pressure on German fighters. The numbers were staggering. In June alone, 8th and 9th Air Force P-51 units flew 17,834 sorties, claimed 468 aerial victories, and destroyed another 421 aircraft on the ground. German fighter losses for the same month totaled 1,123 aircraft, losses that couldn't be replaced. More critically, Germany was losing its experienced pilots faster than new ones could be trained. The Luftwaffe's fighter training program, once the finest in the world, had been gutted. Fuel shortages meant student pilots received less than 100 hours of flight time before being thrust into combat. Some pilots were entering combat with as little as 30 hours in type. American pilots, by contrast, arrived with 400-plus hours of training, including extensive gunnery practice, formation flying, and instrument work. They'd practiced against captured German aircraft, understanding their enemy's capabilities intimately. The qualitative gap was as wide as the quantitative one. Major Erich Hartmann, the highest-scoring ace in history with 352 victories, primarily on the Eastern Front, transferred to the Western Front in early 1944. His assessment of American pilots was sobering. Against the Russians, we had experience and better aircraft. Against the British, we had numbers. Against the Americans, we have nothing. Their pilots are well-trained. Their aircraft are superior above 6,000 meters, and they have unlimited numbers. When you shoot down one, 2 more appear. When we lose one pilot, he's gone forever. They can afford to trade losses. We cannot. The P-51's finest hour came during Operation Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's desperate New Year's Day 1945 attack on Allied airfields. In a last-gasp effort to destroy Allied air power on the ground, nearly 900 German fighters launched surprise attacks across Belgium and the Netherlands. At several airfields, the German attacks achieved tactical success, destroying dozens of Allied aircraft. But the strategic result was catastrophic for the Luftwaffe. At WWII airfield near Asch, Belgium, home to the 352nd Fighter Group's Mustangs, the attack initially caught the Americans by surprise. German fighters strafed the field, destroying several P-51s and damaging the control tower. But within minutes, Mustangs that had been on patrol began arriving. They'd heard the distress calls and were vectoring in at maximum speed. What followed was a massacre. Captain William T. Wisner, already an ace with 11 kills, was leading a flight of 4 Mustangs returning from patrol when he spotted German fighters strafing Y-29. Without hesitation, Wisner dove on the attackers. His first burst caught a FW-190 as it pulled up from a strafing run. The Focke-Wulf exploded spectacularly, raining burning debris across the airfield. Wisner's element engaged 2 Bf-109s attempting to escape at low level. Both were shot down within seconds. All across the battle zone, the story repeated. German fighters, focused on ground targets and low on fuel from their long approach flights, were bounced by Mustangs with altitude and speed advantage. The Americans showed no mercy. Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer, the 352nd Fighter Group's commander, shot down 2 FW-190s in less than a minute. His wingman got another. Captain Sanford K. Motes destroyed 3 Bf-109s in a single engagement. By noon, the battle was over. The Luftwaffe had lost 271 aircraft, nearly one-third of the attacking force. Worse, 213 pilots were killed or captured, including 23 squadron and group commanders. These were irreplaceable veterans the instructors needed to train new pilots. The Allies lost 134 aircraft, almost all destroyed on the ground. But by the next morning, replacement P-51s were already arriving from depots in England. The pilots who'd survived were back in the air, hunting for German fighters. Bodenplatte destroyed the Luftwaffe as an effective fighting force. After January 1st, 1945, German fighter opposition became sporadic and increasingly desperate. In the final months of the war, P-51 pilots found themselves with a new mission: jet interception. The Messerschmitt Me 262, with its 540 miles per hour top speed, was theoretically invulnerable to piston engine fighters. But theory didn't account for American ingenuity. Mustang pilots developed tactics specifically for jet hunting. They couldn't catch Me 262s in level flight, but they could catch them during takeoff and landing when the jets were most vulnerable. And they could catch them in certain dive profiles. Major George Preddy, the top Mustang ace in Europe with 26.83 victories, explained the technique in a briefing. The 262 is fast, but it bleeds energy in turns. If you catch one turning, you can get inside his radius and cut him off. The other opportunity is the dive. From high altitude, a Mustang in a full power dive can hit 500 plus mph, fast enough to close on a jet if you time it right. On November 1st, 1944, Lieutenant Urban Drew demonstrated this tactic brilliantly. While escorting bombers near Ostersleben, Drew spotted 2 Me 262s preparing to attack the formation. The jets had the speed advantage, but Drew had altitude, 28,000 feet of it. Drew rolled inverted in dove, his Mustang accelerating through 450 miles per hour, then 480, then 500. The controls stiffened as compressibility effects set in, but Drew held the dive, gaining on the jets below. At 12,000 feet, Drew was close enough. He pulled out hard, his vision tunneling from the G-forces and positioned behind the trailing Me 262. The jet pilot, focused on the bombers ahead, never saw the diving Mustang. Drew's gun camera captured the kill. 6 streams of .50 caliber fire converged on the Me 262's starboard engine. The jet turbine exploded, and the aircraft rolled inverted, trailing fire. The pilot ejected, but too low, his parachute never fully deployed. Drew's wingman engaged the second Me-262, forcing it to break off its attack. Both Mustangs climbed back to altitude, mission accomplished. In the final 6 months of war, P-51 pilots claimed 45 Me-262s destroyed, a remarkable achievement against an aircraft theoretically 100 miles per hour faster. The final accounting of the P-51's war record is staggering. In Europe alone, Mustang pilots claimed 4,950 aerial victories and destroyed an additional 4,131 aircraft on the ground. These numbers represented nearly half of all German aircraft losses on the Western Front. But statistics don't capture the human dimension of the Mustang's impact. In April 1945, General Lieutenant Adolf Galland led a last-ditch unit of experienced pilots flying Me-262s, Jagdverband 44. Despite flying the most advanced fighter in the world, Galland's pilots were harassed constantly by Mustangs. They couldn't take off without P-51s circling overhead, waiting. They couldn't land without diving Mustangs attempting to catch them vulnerable. Galland described the helplessness in his post-war memoir. "We had the better aircraft, technically speaking. The Me-262 was faster, better armed, more advanced. But we couldn't use these advantages. The Americans controlled the sky at every altitude. They were there when we took off. They were there when we landed. They were there at 10,000 meters and at treetop level. The Mustang wasn't just a fighter. It was a symbol of American dominance. When you saw those silver wings, you knew you were facing not just a machine, but an entire industrial system that could produce thousands of them while we struggled to build hundreds of 262s. The psychological impact was even more profound than the material losses. German pilots who'd fought bravely for years developed what medics called Mustang neurosis, anxiety attacks triggered by the sight of long-nosed fighters or the sound of Merlin engines. Unteroffizier Klaus Faber, a veteran of 127 combat missions, experienced a complete breakdown in March 1945 after an encounter with P-51s near Munich. He was found in his dispersal, hands shaking, unable to climb into his Bf-109. "I can't do it," Faber reportedly told his commanding officer. "When I close my eyes, I hear those guns. That sound like the sky ripping apart. I see my friends exploding, turning into fire and pieces. The Mustangs are always faster, always higher, always there. We can't win. We're just dying slower." Faber was quietly transferred to non-flying duties. His story was repeated across the Luftwaffe. By April 1945, German fighter pilots had a life expectancy measured in missions, not months. On May 8, 1945, the war in Europe ended. P-51 units continued flying patrols until the final hour, maintaining the air superiority they'd seized 15 months earlier. The North American P-51 Mustang had accomplished what no other fighter could. It had broken the Luftwaffe's back, escorted bombers to every corner of the Reich, and established American air dominance, so complete that German fighters became irrelevant. Production figures tell part of the story. North American built 15,586 Mustangs during the war, more than any other American fighter, except the P-47. At peak production in 1944, the Inglewood plant was completing one P-51 every hour, 24 hours a day. Each aircraft required 15,000 individual parts, 3 miles of electrical wiring, 1,500 pounds of aluminum, and one Packard Merlin engine containing 14,000 precision components. Yet American workers, many of them women who'd never seen an aircraft before 1942, assembled these complex machines to tolerances tighter than peacetime standards. The Mustang represented American industrial philosophy perfectly. Design excellence married to mass production. Where German fighters were handcrafted by skilled artisans. Beautiful but time-consuming to build, Mustangs rolled off assembly lines with the precision of Swiss watches and the reliability of farm tractors. This industrial advantage, combined with superior pilot training and aggressive tactics, created an unbeatable combination. In 1977, a reunion of Luftwaffe and American fighter pilots was held in San Diego. Among the attendees was General Lieutenant Gunther Rall, third highest scoring ace in history, with 275 victories. When asked about the P-51, Rall's response was profound. The Mustang was the most beautiful fighter of the war, sleek, purposeful, deadly. But beauty isn't why we feared it. We feared it because it represented something we couldn't match: American industrial power combined with tactical excellence. Every time we took off in 1944 or 45, we knew the Mustangs were up there, waiting. They had the fuel to stay up for hours. They had the ammunition to fight for minutes, not seconds. They had the performance to engage us on their terms, not ours. And behind every Mustang we shot down, there were 10 more being built. The most terrifying sound of the war wasn't bombs falling or artillery fire. It was those 6 Brownings opening up behind you. That mechanical thunder, precise, unstoppable, inevitable. When you heard that sound, you had maybe 2 seconds to react. Usually, you didn't get even that. The Mustang didn't just defeat us tactically. It defeated us psychologically. It proved that our technical expertise, our combat experience, our courage, none of it mattered when facing unlimited American resources. We were craftsmen fighting a factory. We never had a chance. Today, the P-51 Mustang remains one of the most recognizable aircraft in history. Its sleek lines and checkered nose art are instantly identifiable, symbols of American air power at its peak. But for those who faced it in combat, the Mustang represents something else. The moment when the Luftwaffe's laughter died, replaced by the thunder of Merlin engines and the ripping canvas sound of synchronized Brownings. German pilots had mocked the early American fighters, the tubby Thunderbolts, the graceless Airacobras. They'd laughed at Yankee engineering and farm boy pilots. The laughter echoed across occupied Europe in 1942 and 1943. Then the P-51 arrived. Silver wings caught the sun over Berlin. Contrails painted the sky above Munich. The thunder rolled across Germany from the Rhine to the Oder. And the laughter stopped. Because when the Mustangs spoke, with 6.50 caliber voices in perfect harmony, the only sound left was inevitability. The sound of empire falling. The sound of dominance absolute. The sound of thunder over Berlin. The technical supremacy of the P-51 wasn't just about raw performance. It was about reliability under conditions that would cripple other fighters. American engineering philosophy emphasized redundancy and durability in ways German designers, constrained by material shortages, could never match. Each Mustang's 6 Browning M2 machine guns represented a masterpiece of American mass production. Every gun was built to identical specifications across multiple factories. A barrel manufactured in Massachusetts would fit perfectly with a receiver made in Connecticut and a bolt assembly from Ohio. This interchangeability meant field armors could swap parts between aircraft without adjustment. The Germans had nothing comparable. Their MG-151/20 cannons required individual fitting and tuning. Replacement parts often needed hand filing to achieve proper tolerances. A gun removed from one Bf-109 might not function properly in another without hours of adjustment. Lieutenant Colonel Claiborne Kennard, the 355th Fighter Group's armament officer, explained the American advantage. Our guns are designed for mass production and field maintenance. A crew chief can replace a barrel in 15 minutes. The feed system is self-adjusting. The ammunition, API, APIT, and ball mixed in specific ratios, feeds flawlessly even during 9G maneuvers. We tested these guns to destruction. They'll fire 30,000 rounds before requiring depot-level maintenance. In combat, pilots report 0 malfunctions. 0. You pull the trigger, and death comes out. Every single time. The ammunition production alone demonstrated American industrial might. By mid-1944, the Lake City Arsenal in Missouri was producing 50 million rounds of .50 caliber monthly. Each cartridge was inspected, weighed, and tested. Powder charges were measured to within 1 grain of tolerance. Primers were tested at temperature extremes from -40 degrees Fahrenheit to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. This obsessive quality control meant that when a P-51 pilot pressed his trigger at 30,000 feet in sub-zero temperatures, every round fired. When German pilots squeezed their cannon triggers, they never knew if the gun would fire, jam, or explode. The psychological warfare aspect of the Mustang's guns cannot be overstated. The sound itself became a weapon. Oberst Johannes Mackey Steinhoff, a Luftwaffe ace who survived the war with 176 victories, described the acoustic terror in a 1952 interview. You could hear them coming before you saw them. That Merlin engine had a distinct pitch, higher than our BMW radials, more aggressive. But the guns? Got 'em Himmel, the guns. When 6 Brownings opened fire, it wasn't individual shots. It was one continuous roar, like an industrial machine tearing sheet metal. You felt it in your bones, even inside a closed cockpit. The sound meant one thing. Someone was about to die, and it was probably you. German pilots developed superstitions around the sound. Some refused to fly without cotton stuffed in their ears beneath their helmets, claiming it helped them react faster by reducing sensory overload. Others reported nightmares where the only sound was that mechanical thunder getting closer and closer. The American pilots knew about this psychological edge and exploited it ruthlessly. Captain Don Gentile, a top ace with 21.83 victories, admitted in a 1945 interview, "We learned that short bursts weren't just about ammunition conservation. They were about fear. You'd fire a 1-second burst near a German formation, close enough that they'd hear it, but not close enough to hit. They'd scatter like startled birds. Then you'd pick off the stragglers. The sound made them panic, made them break formation. Once they broke formation, they were dead." The Mustang's operational flexibility extended beyond pure fighter missions. By late 1944, P-51 groups were conducting what modern military planners would call multi-domain operations, seamlessly transitioning between air superiority, escort, interdiction, and close air support roles. On December 23, 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, the 357th Fighter Group demonstrated this versatility in a single mission. Taking off from Leiston, England, at 0730 hours, 16 P-51s carried 2 500-pound bombs, each along with full ammunition loads. Their primary mission: escort B-17s bombing marshalling yards near Koblenz. Secondary mission: attack targets of opportunity supporting German ground forces. Major Leonard Kit Carson led the formation. At 1015 hours, they rendezvoused with the bomber stream at 25,000 feet. For 90 minutes, the Mustangs weaved above the B-17s, scanning for Luftwaffe interceptors. At 1,140 hours, radar controllers vectored Carson toward a formation of FW-190s climbing to intercept. The ensuing air battle lasted 8 minutes. Carson's group destroyed 4 German fighters without loss, scattering the remaining attackers. Mission accomplished, but the Mustangs were just getting started. After seeing the bombers safely away from the target area, Carson led his flight down to 5,000 feet, searching for ground targets. Near Prum, they spotted a German armored column, tanks, half-tracks, and supply vehicles, moving toward the front lines. Carson's combat report captured the clinical efficiency: 1,215 hours. Identified enemy armor concentration, approximately 40 vehicles. Initiated bombing run from 8,000 feet, 30-degree dive angle. Released ordnance at 3,000 feet, pulled out at 1,500 feet. Observed direct hits on lead vehicles, secondary explosions indicating fuel and ammunition stores. Orbited and made strafing passes with remaining ammunition. API rounds penetrated vehicle top armor. Column completely destroyed, estimated 35 to 40 vehicles burning. No ground fire encountered. RTB 1,245 hours. In a single 5-hour mission, the 357th had escorted bombers through the most dangerous part of their route, destroyed 4 enemy fighters, and annihilated an armored column. This wasn't exceptional, it was routine. The Luftwaffe's attempts to counter the Mustang threat grew increasingly desperate as 1945 progressed. In February, Reichsmarschall Göring ordered the formation of special Sturmgruppen, heavily armored FW-190s designed to penetrate bomber formations despite fighter escorts. The FW-190A 8/R2 Sturmbach battering ram featured additional armor plating, armored glass windscreens, and heavy cannon armament, two 20mm and two 30mm weapons. The extra weight reduced performance, but theoretically, the heavy armor would allow them to survive P-51 attacks long enough to reach the bombers. The theory failed spectacularly. On March 24, 1945, during a mission to Berlin, Sturmgruppe formations encountered P-51s from the 4th Fighter Group. Major Pierce McKinnon, leading the American formation, immediately recognized the tactical situation. "They're armored," McKinnon transmitted. "Don't waste ammunition on fuselage shots. Wings and tail, structural targets only." The Mustang pilots adjusted their tactics instantly. Instead of aiming for the cockpit or engine, areas now protected by heavy armor, they targeted the FW-190's wings and tail assemblies. The .50 caliber API rounds, designed to penetrate armor before detonating, proved devastatingly effective. Lieutenant Friedrich Unger, one of the few Sturmbach pilots who survived the engagement, described the horror. "We thought the armor would protect us. It did, for about 10 seconds. Then, the Americans changed tactics. They shot our wings off. Literally. I watched Hauptmann Moritz's fighter fold in half when his wing spar was cut by machine gun fire. The aircraft didn't fall. It came apart in the air, pieces tumbling separately. My own aircraft took hits in the tail. The entire rudder assembly separated. I was flying a brick, barely controllable. Of 24 fighters that engaged, I was one of 3 that made it back. The armor was useless. They simply aimed somewhere else." The Sturmgruppen experiment ended after 2 weeks. The losses were catastrophic, over 60% casualties in exchange for minimal bomber kills. The heavy fighters proved too slow to escape after attacks, making them easy prey for the nimble Mustangs. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the P-51's war record was the consistency of its performance across different theaters and conditions. While designed for the high-altitude European war, the Mustang proved equally effective in the vastly different Pacific theater. The 15th Fighter Group, operating from Iwo Jima beginning in March 1945, discovered that the Mustang's long range made it ideal for escorting B-29s on their marathon missions to Japan, a round trip of over 1,500 miles. But the Pacific presented unique challenges. Japanese fighters like the Zero and Oscar were extraordinarily maneuverable at low to medium altitudes. Their lightweight construction and powerful engines gave them turning performance no American fighter could match below 15,000 feet. The solution was familiar: don't turn with them. Colonel James Beckwith, commanding the 15th Fighter Group, developed tactics specifically for the Pacific. "The Zero can outturn us at any speed below 300 miles per hour. Fine. We don't turn with them. We use speed and altitude, just like in Europe. Dive, shoot, extend, climb. The Mustang can dive faster and climb better above 15,000 feet. We dictate the engagement, not them." On April 7, 1945, during the mission to support the Okinawa invasion, Beckwith's tactics were tested against overwhelming odds. 55 P-51s encountered over 150 Japanese fighters, Zeros, Oscars, and the formidable Ki-84 Frank. The Americans used vertical tactics mercilessly, diving attacks from 25,000 feet, building speed to 450 plus mph that would make a single firing pass, and then zoom climb back to altitude. The Japanese fighters, optimized for turning combat, couldn't follow the vertical maneuvers. In a running battle that stretched over 200 miles, the P-51s claimed 26 Japanese fighters destroyed for the loss of 2 Mustangs. But more importantly, they prevented the Japanese from reaching the B-29s, which completed their mission unscathed. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, who fought against Mustangs in the war's final months, offered grudging respect. The American fighter pilots learned not to play our game. They fought their fight, not ours. The Mustang wasn't as agile as our fighters, but it didn't need to be. They hit us from above, from high speed, with those terrible guns, and then disappeared into the sky before we could react. It was like fighting ghosts, deadly ghosts that killed with mechanical precision. The ammunition expenditure statistics reveal the scale of the Mustang's impact. From January 1944 to May 1945, P-51 units in Europe fired over 150 million rounds of .50 caliber ammunition. That's 37,500,000 pounds of lead and steel hurled at the Luftwaffe. To put this in perspective, if you laid those rounds end to end, they'd stretch over 23,000 miles, nearly the circumference of the Earth. The explosive and incendiary content alone equaled 1,875 tons of high explosive. Every round represented American industrial capacity. The copper jackets came from mines in Montana and Arizona. The lead cores from Missouri and Idaho. The steel penetrators from Pittsburgh mills. The powder from DuPont plants in Delaware. The primers from Lake City Arsenal. This ammunition traveled across the Atlantic in convoys, was stored in English depots, distributed to fighter bases, loaded into aircraft by ground crews, and then fired in 2-second bursts that ended lives and destroyed aircraft. The Germans had nothing comparable. By late 1944, Luftwaffe fighters were rationed to 60 rounds per gun for cannon-armed aircraft, enough for 3 or 4 bursts. Pilots learned to fire only when they had perfect shots, because there would be no second chance. American pilots faced no such constraints. With 400 rounds per gun, they could fire multiple bursts, could spray and pray if necessary, could walk their fire on a target with continuous fire. Staff Sergeant Harold Johnson, a crew chief with the 352nd Fighter Group, explained the practical impact. We'd load 2,400 rounds into each Mustang every mission. The pilots would come back with maybe 200 rounds left per gun, sometimes less. They weren't conserving ammunition, they were using it. One pilot told me, "Why save bullets? You guys just load more tomorrow." That was the difference. We had unlimited ammunition. The Germans were counting rounds. The final weeks of the war saw some of the most one-sided aerial combat in history. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe was a shadow force. Fuel shortages meant that even when aircraft were available, they often couldn't fly. Pilot quality had collapsed. Teenagers with 30 hours of training were being thrown into combat against American veterans with hundreds of hours of combat time. On April 16, 1945, the 339th Fighter Group encountered what may have been the last significant Luftwaffe formation over Germany. Approximately 60 mixed Bf-109s and Fw-190s attempting to intercept bombers near Leipzig. The ensuing massacre was recorded by multiple gun cameras and later studied at the USAF Tactical School as an example of complete air superiority. Major William Clark, leading the American formation, spotted the German fighters climbing through 15,000 feet. His 32 P-51s held altitude at 28,000 feet, a 13,000-foot advantage. Bounce in 30 seconds, Clark transmitted, "No heroics. Standard tactics. Make your passes count." The Mustangs rolled inverted and dove. By the time the German fighters realized they were under attack, the Americans were already firing. The first pass destroyed 9 German fighters in less than 15 seconds. The survivors broke formation, scattering in all directions. Exactly what the Americans wanted. What followed wasn't a dogfight. It was execution. Divided and panicked, the German fighters were picked off individually. Some tried to dive away, but the Mustangs were faster. Some tried to climb, but the Americans had altitude advantage. Some tried to turn, but P-51 pilots simply disengaged and attacked from a different angle. The entire engagement lasted 12 minutes. When it ended, 31 German fighters had been destroyed. Not one P-51 was lost. Not one B-17 was damaged by fighters. Among the German dead was a 15-year-old pilot, Hans Müller, who'd been in the Luftwaffe for 6 weeks. His Bf-109 was found crashed near Halle, the cockpit riddled with .50 caliber holes. He'd never had a chance. In the final accounting, the P-51 Mustang didn't just win air superiority. It achieved air supremacy, so complete that the Luftwaffe ceased to exist as a meaningful force. The numbers are stark. In the final 6 months of war, Mustang units achieved kill ratios exceeding 10-1. In some engagements, the ratio approached 20-1. This wasn't just tactical success, it was systemic annihilation. But beyond statistics, the Mustang's true impact was psychological and strategic. It proved that American industrial power, properly focused, was unstoppable. Each P-51 represented not just a fighter aircraft, but an entire system. Mines producing raw materials, factories producing components, assembly lines producing finished aircraft, training schools producing pilots, supply chains delivering everything to the front lines. Germany couldn't compete with this system. They had talented engineers, brave pilots, sometimes superior technology. But they couldn't build 15,000 advanced fighters while simultaneously producing bombers, tanks, submarines, and everything else a modern military required. The Mustang was the instrument that made this industrial advantage tangible. It was the weapon that turned American factory output into Luftwaffe funerals. On May 7, 1945, the day before Germany's surrender, a lone P-51 pilot, Lieutenant Robert Straubel of the 356 Fighter Group, flew what may have been the last Mustang combat sortie of the European War. Straubel was on armed reconnaissance near Prague when he spotted a Fiesler Fi-156 Storch, a small observation aircraft, attempting to land at a field. The Storch was clearly marked with Red Cross symbols, possibly carrying wounded. Straubel approached carefully, waggling his wings to signal the German pilot to land. The Storch complied. As Straubel circled overhead, he could see German soldiers emerging from the aircraft, walking wounded, limping toward a field hospital. Straubel didn't fire. The war was over, even if the paperwork hadn't been signed yet. He rocked his wings one final time, a salute to an enemy he'd never meet, and turned for home. Behind him, the Merlin engine's distinctive rumble faded into the distance. The thunder was finally silent. The Mustang had completed its mission. The sky belonged to America, and there was no one left to contest it.